Topwaters might be the most overloaded lure category. Today I'm cutting through the clutter and showing you exactly what to pick and how to work it based on what's gotten bit over years of guiding. And at the end, I'll share the one small factor that made the biggest difference in how many bites we got each trip. From guiding for years and years for big bass on Lake Fork, I have tons of experience fishing topwaters. It was a great way to get trips started. A lot of times we caught numbers and sometimes some great big fish. First thing in the morning, we'd fish it for an hour or two. Sometimes during the shad spawn, it'd last longer. And then other days, like the fall, you could fish it all day and get a fun bite. And it was a great laboratory to run experiments. Typically, I'd have two guys in the boat with me. Sometimes I was fishing, sometimes I was not. So we're talking 2 or 3 baits in the water, and I could really experiment different retrieves, different colors, different styles, work it fast, work it slow, all these options. And it was a great lab to figure out what fish wanted with topwater lures. So I'm going to simplify it for you today. I'm going to break down all the lure categories, talk about the sizes and the colors, the shapes, all that stuff. And then most importantly, what really determines whether you're going to get bit or not, to me, is the actual retrieve. So we'll talk about all that, try to simplify it, figure out the couple lures you really need, how to work them to catch more bass on topwaters. Topwaters for me aren't one of my core baits. Usually it's a window of opportunity, early or late, or fish are schooling. But now it's late summer here in Texas, almost fall. So that means they're schooling all day. And then as the fall comes on, a lot of times it's an all-day bite where you can just get up shallow and power fish them. So I normally have a simple 7 baits that I use and keep a topwater always in my rod box as a window of opportunity bait, pull it out when I need it. But coming into this time of the year, all of a sudden it becomes like an all-day player, especially in the fall. But anytime I fish, I always have one in the rod locker just in case, unless it's really, really cold. So let's break this down by categories, and we'll start with poppers. So poppers, you can see they come in a variety of sizes. The big thing I evaluate these on is how much cup there is on the face. The deeper it is, the bigger, the more. They used to be called chuggers because they would just kind of bloop, bloop, you do that. And then they got more refined, and like the Yellow Magic came out, and the Rico, and like Zell Roland was famous for filing down the lips and stuff. The flatter it is, the smaller it is, the more it kind of spits. And it's more of a finesse versus that chug, that lower sound. Depends on the day. These are really easy. There's like low user error as long as you don't work them too fast. Pop them a couple times, let them sit there. Bass will come up and eat them. When it's tough, a lot of times these are really good. These are a classic bait. And then I like ones, so you're going to see my theme here. And at the end, I'm going to show you the ones that I like the best, the couple ones I use most of the time. I like versatility. So these will spit and they'll sit and they'll still draw fish. But I like ones like this bullet pop that actually walk. If you can walk it a little bit, then make it spit. The more different things you can do, the more you can experiment, the more retrieves you can get them to trigger. So I look for poppers that are not only going to pop, but I can walk them as well. And then another extension of this category, it's the poppin' frogs. This happens to be a swamp lure, but any of these that have that concave lip on the front, you can use these. Basically, the frogs are just a popper that you can put in more cover, the more weedless, or you can throw behind boat docks, underneath overhanging brush and stuff, where you can skip these back in. They're just a popper that's more weedless. Now, the next big category, and this is a pretty broad one, the walking baits. Walk the dog, you pop your rod, you make it go left, right, left, right, left, right. You can make these go really narrow and a quick walk, or you can do these slow and really kick them out where they glide a lot more. Basic categories, the Zara Spooks, the most famous one there. This is the Berkeley Jaywalker. These glide a little bit more. It's like the topwater version of a glide bait. If you do a slow, kind of a bigger movement with your rod, a bigger snap, you can make these really drift out wide. Then you can get real tight with them, but make them wide. That general category, this is a staple. It has a big thunk to them, a lot of them, so you get that big drawing power as well. And you can vary it from a wide walk to a narrow one really easily, and you can work these really fast or pretty slow. Now, there's more general ones. Those are great. I use a couple a little bit more specialized ones more often, typically, and this is called the Hijacker. And you see this one versus the regular Jaywalker. It's just deeper. With the length, it's just a deeper bait. What that allows me to do is when it's really windy, it's hard to walk those baits a lot of times. They just get swallowed up by the big waves. But a lot of times when it's really wavy on the bank, crashing into like bluff ends and points and stuff, you can catch them really good, really tight to the rocks, right tight to the shore. And that's where I use the Hijacker. I like a deeper bellied one that's going to walk a little bit better in waves. And then the flip side of that, a lot of times it's sunny and slick. And first thing in the morning, I mean, any walking bait, they're just hammering it. But then they get shy and they kind of come up behind it. This is a more finesse one, and this is called the drift walker. You see, it's just a narrower profile, and it's kind of like a trick worm versus going with a 10-inch worm or something like that. Just a more finesse. It's like the drop shot or wacky worm version of Topwaters. And I use these. They won't walk well if there's a lot of waves, but the problem is when it's sunny slick, starts to get bright, that more finesse walk. That's why I like more finessey ones. To me, a lot of times, that's a lot better solution. And then again, your basic frogs, this is the Swamp Lord, but all the Spros and all that stuff, that's these walking style ones with the pointed nose. You can walk these. Again, this is the weedless version. I can put them underneath overhanging bushes. I can put them around slop where there's lots of lily pads and stuff, where obviously treble hook's going to hang up. And again, behind docks, you can skip these things really well. So I can skip it behind cables and way back in, go through a brush pile, come up and over the cable and stuff. So that gives you the weedless option. Now, the first two are big categories. We had the walkers, and then we had the poppers. Now, there's a hybrid in between, like pencil poppers and stuff that have the concave face on the front that will spit and pop, but then they're long and skinny in the walk as well. You know, pencil poppers are really popular out east on a lot of the herring lakes, the great big ones. And then I've used ones like this, like a gunfish and a chug bug and stuff. There's been variations of these. They've been longtime favorites, this category, just because they're, again, I like versatile. Like the bigger size, the pencil popper size, that's, you know, if they're really aggressive or something, I use that. But more the size that's the more standard walking size of the pencil poppers. This is a cane walker. I like these a lot of times just because I can bloop it. I can get like a spitting when I'm walking it, and I'm still able to walk it. It's a great in-between. I can do a little bit of everything, show them something that most people are going with, either a popper or they're going with a walker. This is a nice in-between where I can show a lot of them. Now let's get into a specialty category. This is the spin rocket or the spin bomb. These are slash baits or prop baits, and I tell you what, in Florida, these things are king. Especially, those fish are always spawning down there, but around the spawn, like fry garters and stuff, I mean, Bobby Lane and guys like Justin Lucas and locals down there, I mean, they kill them on these things. Top 10 all the time, they definitely catch them. Outside of Florida, guys barely use them. I grew up throwing a tiny torpedo, which is kind of like a skinny version of this, just had a single spinner. I remember as a kid, I used to kill them on it. I just don't throw them that much. I'm not an expert in these. If I go to Florida, I'll pull them out. I don't know what I'm doing. Put them down pretty quickly. You know, throw them any spot where you think there's a bed. I think these are underutilized for most of the country. I think there's a big opportunity to use these, but you really can't walk these. You either twitch them or you reel them. It makes a neat sound. It's different. Like I said, outside of Florida, I think there's a real opportunity here, but this isn't my go-to. Now, the last style are the plopper type baits and the buzz baits, and I left my buzz bait box at my brother's boat, so I didn't have a buzz bait handy to show you, but you know what a buzz bait is. These are the Chapo from Berkeley, you know, the plopper style baits, all those. The thing about this category, buzz baits and ploppers, they work themselves. You cast them out, reel them in, and the action of the bait, these little spinners, they foam up the water. The other ones, like, you're going to have to, with the exception of the prop baits, you're going to have to twitch, make them walk, make them chug. These baits, so basically, you're bringing them into the fish. They're a little bit easier to cover water with because I can just chunk and wind them versus having to twitch it all day, so I can go faster. And these baits typically cover more water, whereas like the walking ones and stuff, I keep them in one spot going left and right, or pop, leave it there. These ones are more search baits, a little bit more aggressive. They're pretty aggressive on the surface. You know, small ones with like the Chapo, it's going to be a higher pitched. I typically like the bigger one on these just because of that deeper sound. Although buzz baits, the little 1/8 ounce ones, those can be money when they're pressured. I've done really well on those, and that's kind of high pitched, a little more finesse. Whereas like the standard size buzz bait, sometimes that's better. But this is definitely a whole different category where you cover water instead of keep it in front of them. Now the whole plopping category and buzz baits, you know, they're notorious for, they are kind of bigger baits, a lot of the ones we throw, but they are notorious for catching big fish, even the small size ones. So I like them for that reason. And then also with the buzz bait, if you put a frog on the back, or you take the skirt off and just put a frog on the back, you can skip those around docks. So outside of actual frogs, basically the only other topwater you can work very well skipping, getting up underneath cover, are the buzz baits. So that's one more added piece of versatility why I like that plopping and buzz category. So of these baits, how do I pick the ones that I'm going to throw? What are my go-tos? And I think there are a couple things that determine it. And sometimes it's size. Like in the fall, you get a lot of young of the year shad that were spawned, March, April, May of the year. By the time you get to August, September, October, those shad that might go, threadfin that'll be a couple inches long, 3 inches long, gizzard shad that'll get a foot up to almost 2 feet long. They're tiny. You see a lot of little 1-inch shad and stuff. Sometimes they're on minnows and small little stuff. So especially in the fall, it seems like a lot of times tiny, like size of a determining factor. But to me, more so, that's kind of specialized to the fall usually. More so, a lot bigger key to me is the type of retrieve and then the speed that you work it. To me, that's the biggest determining factor. So let me talk about the specific baits I typically use, my go-tos when I go with those, and then I'll get into the retrieves because that's, like I said, that's the most important part, and that plays into why I pick these baits. But basically, starting out, if the fish are not in one location, if they're just kind of randomly spread out, I'm either going with the Chopo or a buzzbait. If I'm in around some cover, there's grass and there's some laydowns and stuff I'm coming over, they're kind of up in the cover, that's when I'm going to go more to the buzzbait. It just comes through the cover. If it's more open water and it's just rock bank, open bank and stuff, then I'll typically go to the plopper, the Chopo, just because with treble hooks, they're notorious for just nipping at these baits, not totally getting them, and that's where the ones that are nipping at it, I can get those a lot of times where they just barely go at it. The treble hook just gives me a few more opportunities, although with the buzzbait, the nice thing, especially if you're around cover, if you hook them, you got them. Now, a lot of times with topwaters, the bite is specific to a spot. If it's shad spawn, they're on a certain point or bank. That's where they're stacked up, a kind of a low, shady bank. Another time, they might be in backs of creeks or something, or a grass line. There's a section where they're at. So I'm not covering tons of water. I'm going to fish it more in an area. That's where I go to these other style baits. And to me, the most versatile is this cane walker, this hybrid. Like I said, it has that spitting face. I can walk it as well really easily. I use that smaller size one, not the great big pencil popper, but the moderate. And this is it's a little bit bigger than a full gizzard or threadfin shad, not as big as a gizzard shad, but it's a size they eat all the time. Just, 3.5, 4 inches, something like that. Good general range. And I'm going to check these fish. I'm going to try all the retrieves with it, try to get them to commit and see, what do they want? Do they want it sitting there? Do they want stop and go? Do they want it working really fast? Do they want it walking really narrowly? Do they want just pause forever? Spit, walk, what is it that they want? This allows me to try all of them. I'm going to keep on varying it up, try all these different combinations until they consistently, it's like, dude, you have to let it sit there 10 seconds, and when it's sitting there, that's when they're eating it. Or when I'm do a lot of chugs, a lot of spits, that's when they want it. Or, dude, it's like, why ever stop it? Go fast. This helps me figure that out pretty quickly. So this, I can do all of it. A lot of days I never get off it because it changes fish to fish. If you're fishing an area, some want it moving fast, some slower, some you can trigger by letting it sit there. That's why the more you can do with it, I think the better off you are. Now, if they're wanting to let it sit a long time, if they're on smaller bait, this happens kind of late fall, where the earlier part of fall, they're really aggressive, but you get the cold fronts coming through and it's barely topwater time still and pretty foggy in the mornings, or it's just awfully bright and it's kind of late where they're just not chasing as good. That's where the poppers, the more spitting ones, where you can just very delicately use a small one like this, a little 1.5, 2-inch size, throw it out there, spit it once or twice, barely, not a bloop, but just a psst, psst, just barely throw a little spray up there and let it sit for a long time. When they want sitting, this thing's just bobbing on the surface. You see the tail kind of bobbing back and forth. It's a really easy meal. That's where I'll go to the popper and go to that small size and let it sit if they want it really finessey. Now, a lot of times they like the walking better and I can keep it moving pretty fast, and the walk is the key deal. At that point, I'm going to the walkers, and I'm typically going to one of the two. Like I said, the Jaywalker, the Zare Spook style, those are good. A lot of guys love them, but I like a little more specialized. Like I said, I go with the hijacker if it's that deeper belly. A lot of times I'm looking for wind. After the first light, calm is fine. Low light, they'll eat it up there. once it's middle of the day and it gets bright, they won't eat in that stuff. But if you get windy points like bluff ends, that's where if you get some wind on it, they'll still come up and eat it really well all day long. That's where I'm going with something that works better in the wind, that deeper belly. And then other days, they'll eat a topwater all day, but there's just a tiny chop, or it's kind of like a misty day or something. They're still getting a pretty good look, and the sun's almost coming out, but it's not. It's hard to go wrong with that drift walker. This one on pressured fish, where it's just barely conditions for a topwater, I can throw this all day. I can walk it fast, but you can draw a lot of bites. They'll just pass up that really obvious, big, loud walking profile. And then the frogs, obviously, I think when these play. Obviously, this is when it's either skipping, you put it back behind docks and stuff, but more so when it's really thick. Once the treble hooks don't work, obviously we all know frogs work, but those are more specialized based on the cover. Okay, so I've talked about the retrieves, kind of alluded to them a number of times. I think you can guess most of those by now, but let me emphasize the one, I'll tell you, this is the hardest to do, and I can't tell you how many times this work is doing nothing. The old retrieve, the standard one on topwater, is throw it out there until the rings all dissipate and all go away. And that's, 5-10 seconds. A lot of times longer than that. This isn't a great way to find them, but if you know where the fish are at and it's kind of a post-frontal or they're not quite committing, you will not believe, and I don't care if it's the big walking baits, if it's the little poppers, the hybrid ones, you will not believe if you give it a couple walks, a couple bloops, and just let it sit there. I can't tell you how many times I've had guide customers who were smokers. They would go into their pocket and they would get their cigarettes out. Then they can't find their lighter and they're looking around and they get it, and then the lighter won't work. And this is 30 seconds, a minute into it, and all of a sudden their back's turned and they're trying to light it in a little breeze or something, and you hear a kaboom and their head comes around like, hey, where's my bait at? Like, hey, dummy, he just ate it, right? That's happened more times than you can count. And it's the hardest thing to do as a regular bass fisherman because we want to twitch it and work it, and that spot looks good, and it's hard to do. I typically throw it out there when they're on this retrieve. You have to throw it out, and I'll put my hand underneath my armpit, like my reeling hand, and I'll put it there, and then I'll hold on to the rod, and I'll make myself count to like 30 Mississippi or 10 Mississippi or something. Hard to do, but man, as it cools down in the fall, that retrieve is so good. But that's the one that people do the least, and I don't know how many times I saw with guide customers where the one guy's working it quicker would get no bites. You had to let it sit there, and if you let it sit there, the longer you let it sit there, and sometimes we're talking like 30 seconds to a minute, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, but that thing's bobbing on a little ways. We think it's just sitting there. Those things rocking just a little bit, and those bass must be looking up underneath it. If it's got a little tail on it, it's bobbing back and forth. But man, that makes all the difference. So I'll keep running through the retrieves, but don't forget, there's one thing I'll say at the end that I did see with guide customers that made the biggest difference. It's pretty wild to tell you about that. But with the rest of the retrieves, pretty simple. The rest, the spitting one like we talked about, the more aggressive, more slack you have in it, you can make it chug or you can make it spit more. You can play around with that. And then walking, you can make it, like I said, you can make it narrower, make it faster, or you can do it slower where it really kicks out. If you have a big snap, you just pop with your line with some slacking and hit it. You can make walking baits, a lot of them really kick out wide. Sometimes it's wide and faster, sometimes slower and wide, narrow and stuff. And a lot of times I like to mix it up. When it changes from real sluggish to slow and wide, all of a sudden come real fast and then stop it and then maybe fast again and slow. Mixing it up's real good. Stop and go is really good. You don't have to let it sit there, even when they're aggressive a lot of times, but just throwing in a slight pause and then take off again. I always talk about that whole classic thing about when you're in bear country, they say if you encounter a grizzly, don't take off running. It triggers a predatory response. And we always talked about with police, if you're walking down the street, if a cop car comes up behind you and all of a sudden you take off running, he's going to come after you, right? It's the same thing with bass. If this thing goes fast and then stops, it's like, oh, I saw a bass and takes off again, that stop and go, man, that triggers them. So the variety of them, walking narrow to wide, stop and go, let it sit, make it spit a little bit, trying the combination, figure out which of those they want, and then in what sequence do I want to walk it a long ways, a little ways, Do I want 3 spits versus just one? It seems like it's going to vary from fish to fish, but you're going to get a general theme for the day. So again, I hate to belabor it, but mix it up. Then you're going to ask colors too. It's pretty simple. You can see a lot of these. I mean, the translucents and stuff, like whitish sort of translucent or shad. They're always eating minnows or shad on this, outside of a few bluegill. But this is typically a shad minnow deal. I think you're hard pressed, even in muddy water. I've done well with like the translucents and kind of translucent white, bones and stuff. Those are always good. Sometimes when it's bright, like the chrome, I've had guys do well on that. That's not necessarily my go-to, but those can be good. Straight white, sometimes if it's more muddy, and I don't even have one out, this is more of a bluegill one, but sometimes white's good. Those are great, obviously, on buzz baits. And then black, that's the one. I use them more on I don't have one out, but the Choppos and stuff. Black's a great color. It's great in frogs and stuff. So I typically don't own a lot of these topwaters in black, but I should throw a little bit more. I know with the plopper type baits, I use it on that and the frogs. And then sometimes with the frogs, you can go with the bluegill and the natural. If they're really keyed in on bluegill. It's around the bluegill spawn or protecting beds and stuff. Sometimes bluegill's good. But to me, I like a translucent white. That's kind of just that shaddy looking thing that they don't get too good of a look at, because so many times they're studying these baits. If they're really aggressive, a bright white, that solid black or something would be good. But a lot of times when it sits there for a long time, that natural to shad, hard to beat that. Now quickly on the rigs I throw them on, you don't need high-end equipment on this. Like I throw the Fenwick rods. You can, the Eagle series, which is about $100. You don't need to spend $400 on a touchy-feely rod. Most of these, you're working with the rod tip down, so it can even be a little bit heavier rod. But I like typically a 6'10" to a 7 foot. You're working a lot of this with the rod tip down, so I don't want something too long, but the 7 foot seems about right to me, where I can still cast it a decent distance. A lot of times that's important, and you can play the fish a little bit better. Medium, typically a medium bait, unless I'm using like a big plopper, big walking bait, go up to medium heavy, but just like a medium, a pretty good bend, a moderate fast action, something that bends pretty deep. Maybe it loads up the rod a little bit more when you cast it, but I'll tell you what, playing them, you want a pretty soft rod, especially because a lot of times I prefer to go to braid, like the 30-pound Dura braid, something like that, where I can cast these a long distance. It just handles better. And then if I'm reeling it more, then I'll go straight braid, say like on the Choppo and buzz baits, frogs. Now, if I'm walking it more, that braid is too limp and it's going to tangle up, especially on the stuff like props and stuff. So then I'll put a mono, say like a 15-pound leader, and not a real long one, about a foot and a half, where I'm not reeling it up in the guides, but put like a 15-pound leader, like big game, something that's pretty strong and shock resistant. Put that on the front. You're not tangling up your bait. And then in terms of reel, if you want to spend a little bit extra, you're working these baits all day. If you're doing it all day, walking the dog, it's a little bit tougher on your wrist. So I'll use like a lighter like that. I use the Abu Garcia. It's their Xenon X. It's a lighter weight reel. I think the smaller size for like some of the poppers and stuff too. It starts up. It casts those a little bit better. But a lot of these baits, you don't need a high-end reel just because they cast so well. They're like a bullet. They cast about as well as anything. So really, you don't have to go real high-end on your gear for these. Just have that soft rod and a decent drag so you can play those fish in. Okay, so I teased it enough now. I've teased it the whole video, but what's the one factor that makes the biggest difference? And you might have seen it on some of these baits already, but man, if I didn't see it myself every single day out there, I wouldn't have guessed this. And typically I'm not big on like playing around with all these different factors and stuff. And it's like either they want a topwater or they don't. But the feathered treble, the difference that it makes, you cannot believe it. And like on walking baits, on poppers and stuff. Now, when you sit there, that bait, the bait's gonna rock in the water just with a tiny bit of wave action. And you can see just me holding it. That feather's always going, and it wants to kind of, the better ones, and I'll carry feather replacements and stuff. They fan out, and I don't want the ones that are, some of these hackles are like a hair jig or something. I mean, they're like 5 inches long. Just a basic one. It doesn't need to be much. There's usually a feather and a bit of mylar, but I can't tell you how much of a difference. With guide trips, there'd be 2 customers typically and me, and we'd mix it up. And one day to the next, they would show a clear preference for, these popping baits. You let them sit there a long time, especially I would try them, put one guy on a bait with one and one without. And a lot of times that was the determining factor. And once you had one of those, it wasn't like, well, one caught 9, the other caught 11, or one caught 4, one caught 5. It was like the one guy would get one bite and the other have 9, and we're like, okay, time to change it over. Happened day in, day out. Now with the walking baits, not quite as much, but yeah, a lot of times it would make a difference. I'd try back and forth, that bait going, and you're always mixing those pauses and stuff. If you're walking continuously the whole day, sometimes not going to make a difference, but day in, day out, I could not believe it. That feathered treble on the back, I'm all about, once I get it dialed in, the one I'm using, and I typically have a couple in my box with and without, I'm going to try that treble on the back because it makes all the difference in the world. Gonna have to trust me on this, but I would have never guessed it, but day in, day out, I saw it time and again. That feathered treble or not having it one day or the next made all the difference in the world. Man, we have more options than ever with lures, so many colors, so many styles. It's hard to cut through the noise and figure out what works. I have a whole playlist, my Simple 7, the 7 go-to techniques and lures that I go with. I try to break down each lure category, show you the ones that work and how to fish them. Check out that full playlist here and some of those videos. If you like how I broke down topwaters, I think those will help you break down some other lures as well.